Hello, I'm Andy Seetherton, Senior Instructor Combat Fusion Martial Arts, and welcome to this, our next video in our InfoPod series on Techniques of the Orange Belt syllabus. Before I start, I'd like to thank all of you who have subscribed to our channel. We're small in number, but we're growing gradually. If it's your first time here to one of our videos, please think of subscribing, and also remember to hit that notification bell so you'll be notified when we do upload more videos. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at locking horns, which is a frontal headlock used in the contact manipulation range. We'll usually, as usual, we'll go through the video in a non-partner format so you can see the moves without obstruction, and then we'll break it down into sections and go into the extension, and then as usual we'll have a couple of variations at the end so you can have a look at something different. So with that being said, let's get into locking horns.
There are several different types of attacks that could be utilised in the contact manipulation range of this technique. A clinch type hold, a simple two-handed grab, a frontal headlock, or a guillotine headlock. In this video we will use the guillotine lock as our example attack. This type of frontal headlock is where locking horns acquires its name. It is representative of a bulldogger wrestling a steer to the floor by locking its horns. Before we get into the meat of this technique, let's discuss the attack itself. A common issue that occurs with this and other techniques is one of poor preemptive attitude. This can result in lazy Kenpo. Avoid getting into the unconscious habit of proffering an attack opportunity by presenting yourself as an easy target. Rather set up attack scenarios that make your opponent work to get you where he wants you. In this video, we'll be using a feint followed by a punch. The application of the guillotine headlock will very likely elicit a flinch reaction. The initial counter-strike in locking horns is a functionalization of this flinch reaction. As the headlock is applied, your opponent will also attempt to apply a choke. Counter this by turning your head towards your opponent and tucking your chin into your shoulder as you do so. An interesting side note, and obviously depending upon your environment, this action of turning your head towards your opponent may present you with an early exit strategy. When executing the initial move, step forward across your opponent's center line into a wide kneel stance. As you check above your opponent's knee with your rear hand, while simultaneously employing a reverse handsword to his groin with your lead hand. This move is better viewed from the front. By removing the opponent, we can see that our head is turned and chin tucked in to our shoulder. The lead hand is striking to the groin. The rear hand is checking at our opponent's knee. The resulting position of our arms makes the shape of a wedge. This will aid in protecting us from any possible flank attacks from our opponent. As our opponent reacts to the initial groin strike, immediately follow up with an upward vertical obscure elbow to his chin from your lead arm, as your rear hand positionally checks. Continue this movement on to deliver twin outward claws to our opponent's face. As he reacts to protect his eyes by raising his hands, utilize twin downward gravitational checks to your opponent's arms. This in turn drops his head back down into range for an inward elbow sandwich with your lead arm. We will now proceed on to the extension to locking horns. If you do not require this at your stage of training, you may wish to bypass the next section of this video. From the elbow sandwich, move forward, dropping into a front twist stance as you simultaneously deliver an outward horizontal hammer fist to our opponent's floating rib with your lead hand and an inward horizontal heel palm to his solar plexus or face. Now thread your rear knee from behind your lead leg to impact your opponent's groin. Immediately stomp down onto his foot, utilizing marriage of gravity to break the bridge of this foot or crush his toes. As your opponent reacts to this stomp, utilize your rear foot by threading it in reverse to deliver a rear crossover stomp to your opponent's other foot, again to either break the bridge or crush the toes. From here, front crossover and cover out.
Hello and welcome back. So now we're going to look at some of the differences we can apply to locking horns. In this first example, we're actually going to be looking more at the extension than the base technique. At Combat Fusion, we don't actually use the base technique as a grading requirement, although we do teach it, obviously, because it contains very important lessons. The grading requirement is the actual extension to this example technique we're going to give you now. This involves using the rear crossover in an unusual sweep capacity and also being able to put our opponent in a position which allows us to fracture the knee joint on exiting the technique. So let's take a look at this variation. So one of the things I find, and I think many instructors will say they find the same situation with this technique, is if our opponent doesn't react correctly in a prescribed manner, because remember, we have to work under the assumption of injury. If we don't assume injury to the strikes in Kenpo, then the strikes have to be done more forceful, and that does then run the risk of actually creating an injury in our training partner, and then we don't have a training partner. So assumption of injury is very important. So if we have an opponent who doesn't assume injury in this technique, that can cause problems in going past the initial strike. People tend to get caught up in the lock itself. Now, although this shouldn't occur in the base model in the ideal phase, obviously it could happen in a formulation setting. So here we're going to show a couple of techniques which actually use that as a way of formulating an answer. In the first one, we're going to be looking at going from locking horns into the extension of bow of compulsion and then entering back into the extension of locking horns again. Now moving on to this final example, we're going to use just a simple shoulder bars to disrupt our opponent's balance by corrupting his posture slightly and allowing us to go into a leg takedown and finish out with the extension to bowing to Buddha. Well, thank you for joining us here at Combat Fusion in this video on locking horns. If you've enjoyed the content, please give the video a like, and don't forget, if you haven't yet subscribed, please think of doing so. This is Andy Seelan of Combat Fusion Martial Arts saying goodbye.